reviewing Sicario is just another line to cross. Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Stone podcast. So, today we're going to be doing our favorite series, well, one of our favorite series. Have you seen? Danny G, may you please let the people know what the hell this series is about?
So this is Have You Seen, in which we talk about a movie that some of us know well and others have just seen for the first time. This week we are talking about Sicario, which is a 2015 crime thriller by Denis Villeneuve. So I'd just seen this for the first time, and I think, Jonathan, you've seen it once, and Hervé, you suggested this one. And as punishment, you now have to summarize the plot of Sicario.
So, as a summary, Sicario kind of follows the story of an FBI agent, Kate Mercer, who receives a top assignment recruited by a mysterious government official, Matt Graver. And Kate essentially joins the task force for this escalating war against the cartel in Mexico. And it's led by the intent and very shadowy Alejandro. And essentially, the story kind of follows a team traveling back and forth across the US and Mexican border, running several operations to kind of shake things up within the cartel and essentially just using one cartel boss to flush out a bigger cartel boss that they're after. So, with that, Jonathan, I know you've seen it before, so I think we'd go to Daniel first. What was your thoughts on the movie?
So my first thought is that Denis Villeneuve knows how to make a movie, especially a good-looking movie. It's like it has like this quality, this cinematic quality that so many modern movies don't have, where it just looks good and it looks just big and exciting. And I could watch this movie with the sound off. It just looks wonderful. But the plot itself is also really interesting. I knew a little bit about the Mexican cartels and the drug trade and drug smuggling into the US and all of that, but not a lot. So I didn't have a whole lot of background on this, but just the way the characters act and just how we kind of get our glimpse into this very violent and lawless world, and just people's attempts at achieving various forms of justice that are not really compatible with each other, was a really interesting thing to watch.
For me, I would say it was good watching this again. I think one of the main takeaways for this one, and one of my the main things which I enjoyed about it, was kind of like seeing how two philosophies clash, two different philosophies when it comes to tackling the cartel. And I think that's where a lot of the times you're going to get, well, for me, that's why I got my excitement, because it kind of puts you in a situation where you're thinking to yourself, okay, who are you rooting for, number one, and what would you do in a way? And obviously they're both in their own way. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, both of them are not wrong for obviously how they're going about what they're going about. So yeah, I think kind of like just seeing that on screen and how that was portrayed very well, very very well. And it's an enjoyable movie. A very enjoyable movie. Of course, it's not a perfect film, but I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, overall, I had a good experience watching this again.
Yeah, for me, I kind of just like echo what has been said by everyone here. I think it's a great movie. Like Daniel said, it's like really great to look at, especially the scene when they're going through the tunnel towards the end of the movie, and it's just like this like nighttime shot, and you just see sort of the soldiers traveling, and they're kind of like, you almost see like a silhouette of them just like traveling through the night. It's just like, great things like that in the movie that make it visually appealing. And then it's just like the tone of it and how like dark, how gritty, and how it really, questions morality and sort of what's right and what's wrong, and how dirty do you have to play when you're tackling, or to kind of quote from the movie, how much of a wolf do you have to be to hunt other wolves in this game. And obviously we kind of understand that through Kate and through Alejandro, especially in this movie. But to kind of sort of kick off the conversation here, Daniel, I think, off podcast, you mentioned about the plot of the movie and how it was, or you kind of wish me luck summarizing the plot. But, what was your thoughts on the story, and what was your thoughts on sort of essentially the plot as it was unfolding in the movie?
So I think this is definitely one of those movies where you have to watch it more than once, at least twice, because the first time you watch it, you don't even know what the plot is. Like it's not like when you first watch it, you might think it's Kate Mesa's story, right? Where she kind of goes from regular law enforcement into this war zone and has to kind of adjust to it and has to kind of maybe learned some lessons or accomplished something, and it's not her story, right? Like she doesn't really have a story. It's really the story of Alejandro's, right? Where he tries to achieve justice for what was done to him, like in a previous life, basically. And all of these different stories, like Kate's investigation and the drug busts and Alejandro's like personal revenge vendetta, like all of these are different stories, and you don't really know which of them is the real story until it's over, right? So I think I'm gonna have to watch this again, knowing what it's about this time, and I think that will be a very different experience, especially considering when I first started watching it, I didn't know anything about it. I knew the subject matter, but that was about it. And I kept thinking, okay, this is we're kind of delving into like this, like this is a story about law enforcement, right? This is a story about going after these drug cartels, through the eyes of Kate, and it just turned into something very different, right? So I expected like 2 hours of raids and tough guys talking about how difficult the job is, and we basically got that in the first 20 minutes, and after that it kind of turns into something else, right? As we start seeing other aspects of this conflict, right, and of this dilemma. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, essentially, you kind of go in there, like you said, thinking it's a law enforcement movie, but actually, it's a bit of a revenge story, really and truthfully. And I was kind of like just like doing some research and kind of reading about around the movie, and actually, Denis Villeneuve actually cut the majority of Alejandro's lines in this movie and purposely made him a little bit more mysterious, a little bit more kind of like vague in the story, just to kind of add that level of like mystery. And for me personally, I felt like that worked because the whole time you're questioning who he is, you really never know who he is, what his deal is. And I think it avoids issues that other movies face, such as like exposition dumps, where you're kind of just told the characters sort of motivation, or you're kind of told how the character is sort of feeling. But here you have to like, because he doesn't have that many speaking lines, you just have to see it through his performance. You kind of understand his character and his personality, and sort of know how hardened he's become because he's lived in this world and he's sort of experienced this world for so long, and he's sort of dealt with them both as a prosecution lawyer, and then secondly as the Sicario, as the hitman in the story. So for me personally, I thought that was a good move, but I don't know, what did you think about him having such little lines in this movie, and sort of him basically not really saying much, but the story being about him?
I was going to say, doesn't Graver, the Josh Brolin character, just outright exposit what's going on? Like 80% through the movie, he kind of has this exchange with Kate, and doesn't he just outright tell her what his deal is? That he's that he
Yeah,
used to work for the cartel, and I think his family was killed, and now he's looking for revenge. Like it feels like it's mysterious right up until that point, and then like a third character, just tells us through Kate, right? Isn't that the case, or is there more when you rewatch it?
I wouldn't say there's more. I think there's definitely that exposition dump where it's like, okay, playing it plain and simple, but then it makes you rethink how you sort of saw everything else in the movie. So, for example, when they're interrogating uh, the guy in when they're interrogating, I can't remember who it was they picked up, but they're interrogating the guy, and then Alejandro walks in, and you can see like the agents like walking out, and then they switch off the cameras and stuff like that, because really and truthfully, he's actually not part of the law enforcement. He's just a contracted killer, essentially. That's part of the myth. So it kind of re like you kind of like re understand how he's how he was operating, and you understand his methods, and like how cold and how calculated he was in everything that he was doing. Even when he was torturing, what's that guy's name? The actor that plays Punisher. I think it's like, no, it's not Adam Richardson or whatever. But like even in those moments where you can see like everyone else, all the other law enforcement people aren't actually the ones that are doing the torturing, doing any of those interrogation methods. They're just kind of sitting by and letting it happen, essentially. So it kind of, once you fully understand who he is, what he is, his motivations. Yeah, I think they just kind of like dump it out there, but it does make you kind of like re-understand his character a little bit more as you look through and as you sort of know see his actions throughout the movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because watching it the first time, I could tell he had an agenda, right? He was on his own mission, and he was kind of just waiting for a chance to do what he wanted to do. But I didn't pick up on any like clues as to what it was specifically. So yeah, that's kind of what I meant by you kind of have to be told. But yeah, so that's and it's definitely one to kind of pay attention to on rewatch.
But I still feel like with his character, even though he wasn't saying much and he was a big mystery and needed big mystery, I still feel like his actions alone proved that he had some sort of personal vendetta. But at the same time, he was a puppet, which kind of mirrors how like a lot of these outside foreign interventions kind of like operate when it comes to like with how they operate when it comes to their influences on smaller countries. For example, like I can mention like with the Congo, a lot of the times our presidents are just puppets for foreign for foreign powers that be. Do you know what I'm saying? Higher powers a lot of the times, and a lot of times they're just there to show face, say words here and there, but not really do what what they're promising, and not really do what's needed to be done. They're just doing what the foreigners, you know what I'm saying, and
Well,
kind of like telling them to do in a way. So with Alejandro's character, I felt like it mirrored kind of like realism in that sense, because he was just there. He was just used as like a puppet, as a pawn, as a vehicle to create this like kind of like, what do I say, facade, but this image that they're doing things by the book, and what they're doing is by law and is justified, but in reality they're fighting evil with evil. And if do you know what I'm saying? So yeah, so I think even though he wasn't saying much, it's still like there's more to him, and I understand why we're seeing so much of his character, because there's no way it can't be something personal for him to be doing what he was doing, especially during the interrogation scene. In the interrogation scene, I know there are sickos that do certain things like that, but I was like, there's just too much to his character, the way that he's acting in the silence and him doing what he's doing. I just don't think he's actually someone that's being hired just to do kind of like the A grade. It seems like there's definitely more to his character.
well, on paper he is hired to be like the Mexican point of contact, right? Like he represents the Mexican side in this, because by its very nature, these cartels operate across borders, and so like everybody's using everybody else to get what they want, right? Like like Kate as the FBI agent is supposed to give the CIA legitimacy, right? Because they're not allowed to operate within the US, right? But they have to operate inside the US in order to get this cartel, and then in order to operate in Mexico, they need the Mexican corporation, and that is represented by Alejandro, and he's using them so that he can get to the people he wants revenge on. So everybody is using everybody else. And Mexico is nobody's puppet, right? They're not an American like puppet. And one thing that this movie didn't really do is kind of go into the background as to why these cartels are as powerful as they are, and why the Mexican government can't do anything about them. But one thing it did underline was how messy and intractable this entire thing is, where it's not as simple as there are some criminals there who are selling drugs. It's much bigger than this, right? It's not like it just starts with the amount of weapons they have, but it's also this like the scale of their operations and how entrenched they are in the US and in Mexico, and how they basically run most of northern Mexico, right? Because the government just can't get control of them, and so they cooperate with the US in order to get some amount of like kind of make a dent into the cartel operations and all of that, which has traditionally not made a huge difference, right? I'm not totally up to speed on that topic, but from what I understand, nobody has really been able to do anything about the cartels in a lasting way. Like this movie is 10 years old, right? And not much has changed. I think things have gotten only worse from what I've read, because apparently there used to be cartels with manners and they got killed by the cartels without manners, and now things are worse. That's kind of the last update I got. So this is not like this movie is not even portraying the worst part of that era, if you want to put it that way.
I think the movie actually does kind of reinforce that nothing really has changed, or nothing sort of does change, because at the end of the movie, the Mexican police officer that was part of the operation, that was working for the cartel, you see that his son is on the soccer field playing football with his mum, and then you just hear the gunfire going off in the background, and that's kind of a bit of a callback to when Kate's character there with, I can't remember what base they're on, but they're on the base, and then one of the soldiers is like, "Oh, come here, let me show you some fireworks," and then he says something along the lines of, "If you cut off the head of a snake, then there's like a struggle of power, and you can just like hear all like the explosions and the gunfires going off in the background." So I think the movie does kind of raise the point that this is just a cycle that always repeats, essentially.
Yeah, that last scene definitely just as a piece of filmmaking made that point very elegantly, where they basically say, okay, are we in immediate danger? And when the answer is no, they just continue playing football because what else are you gonna do, right? You can't go into crisis mode every time somebody fires a gun or every time there's a gunfight somewhere nearby, right? Like as long as you are not immediately the target, you kind of shrug and say, yeah, what are we going to do about that? So I can't speak to just how realistic this is in terms of this is what it's like in that part of the world, but just as a like a non-verbal way to communicate that idea that this is normal, at least for these specific people. That was a really effective way to end the movie. It actually reminded me of Warfare. Have you guys seen that?
I still haven't actually. I actually still need to watch that.
Yeah, so like Warfare, like yeah, I maybe not don't want to go into like the full ending of it, but essentially, like the plot of Warfare is essentially like this unit of soldiers is trapped in like in a house in somewhere in Iraqi city, and they are under fire from various militias, and they need to be rescued essentially, and then they need to survive long enough to get rescued, and then they get rescued, and then they drive away, and there's like smoking craters in the road and dead people lying in the streets, and all the Americans are gone, and then the Iraqi civilians kind of come out from hiding, and they are left to clean up the mess, right? Or like the Americans are gone and they've done their impressive stuff, but the Iraqis remain behind, right? So it's a similar idea of kind of summarizing an entire conflict in just this one shot, and that's how you end your movie. So like just as a piece of filmmaking, I think that's pretty effective. So but like the broader point I was trying to make is like this movie tries very hard to kind of convey this idea of like this just cannot be solved, right? This is not simply about killing the bad people. This is like a very complicated conflict and like and a very complicated issue, and it's not straightforward, and probably nobody will ever solve it. You can just make, you can make some progress. You can remove some of the bad people, but you can never just fix it, right? Did you think this, like the movie does this effectively, and now it does it well?
I think it does it quite effectively, and I think one of the great points that the movie makes is that for a lot of people in this, it's just business. It's just the way things are, and it's just whatever. But then within that, there's like very real people where it's personal for them. So like, there's that interesting scene at the end of the movie where Alejandro is confronting the cartel boss at the dinner with his family, and they're having a conversation about all the families and everyone that he's killed and all the lives that he's affected, and he's just a man. Like, he's literally just a man, and he's just like, it just is what it is. And compared to sort of what it is for Alejandro. And so, what was your original point? Because I kind of went off a little bit, but what was your original question?
Like the whole movie has the thesis that this is a messy, unsolvable problem. There's the speech, I forget who does it, but like Kate at one point despairs about how like they're never going, like why are they not arresting people, why are they not taking people off the streets, isn't that progress? And I think her boss kind of explains to her that this will not make a difference. Like he says something like, oh, we've been arresting people for years, do you see a difference on the streets? Do you feel safer? Do people here feel safer? And the honest answer is no, right? Because it's just a bottomless well of violence and crime for various reasons. And like the overarching like a theme or idea of the movie is there's just no fixing this. There's just tragedy piled on tragedy, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah. And I think that was like what I was trying to get at in terms of like the point of, how for some it's just normal. It's just like how things are. Again, for like the cartel boss, it's like, these, like, this is just what has to happen for for there to be like that order and that level of control that he has across across his operation. But then what I think what the movie does really well is also show the real experiences, one of Alejandro, but I think even cutting back to the police officer and just kind of showing his family and his life and like just like his son's innocence and his like kind of like love for football. Even like that particular moment where the son touches the gun and his father's like, never touch that. Like he just like gets angry and like kind of scolds him and says, never touch that, because he doesn't want him to follow in sort of the steps, because he knows the trappings of it. He knows the dangers that come of it. But then eventually he dies, and then that boy's going to grow up without a father, and then may fall under the bad influences, and then may just kind of end up in that cycle, and you kind of just like see how the cycle can continue and can kind of continue to sort of repeat. So yeah, I think in various ways, I think the movie does a really good job of just like showing and like making people understand that this is never ending. This is just, one thing after the other. And I think it was just Brolin's character that mentioned about how at the current moment there was too many different cartels or too many different individual cartels, and that the ideal situation isn't for them all to go away. It's for one person to control 80% of it, like the Colombians did at one point. And I think they were probably referencing Pablo Escobar when he had the majority of the control over some of all the cartels. But he makes a point to say that when they can control one person that controls the entire like 80% of production, it's easier and it's more manageable, as opposed to some of the carnage and all the problems that come with having too many rival cartels going after each other.
Yeah, and I think that's what's happened in the real world since then. I think all these various cartels have been replaced by one really powerful one that basically has no scruples. So I wonder if that prediction is kind of has aged poorly. Like again, I'm not too much of an expert on it, but from what I hear, it's not actually made things better that much. One thing that the movie doesn't touch on at all is kind of the reasons for why this situation exists, right? They just say it does and show how intractable it is. And that's, as far as I understand it, there's two major reasons for why this is happening. Number one, the geography of northern Mexico is such that the central government of Mexico just cannot enforce the law there. Like it's just all very local, very regional. Once you are entrenched in that area, like there's basically no, like you can basically do what you want. And then the second leg of it is the bottomless demand for the drugs in the United States, where there's like one, if you control the drug trade into the United States, there's so much money to be made that it's worth every cost. It's worth every sacrifice. It's worth crossing every line, and that is why there will always be somebody trying to own and run that drug smuggling. And I think, unless I missed it, and I was a bit
It
jet
does.
lagged when I watched it, but it does not seem to go into the American side of this at all, right?
There is a line from Josh Brolin's character where he says to Kate Mercer, he says to her, until we can stop 40% of the population inhaling these drugs, then we have to deal with these cartels. And like that I think it's in the same line where he's talking about having one person control majority of the operation, that they can then have some kind of negotiation or some kind of relationship with, where they can kind of control the violence, control a little bit how the operation works from the US side. So it is there a little bit. It doesn't kind of delve into, of course, the Americans' use and the problems within America, but it does reference that until they can stop the population from taking the drugs, then there has to be that level of cooperation with a main cartel that runs everything.
But the movie could have shown this, right? It could have shown how it gets from a factory or a farm, or however it works in Mexico, to the end user in the US, right? And then it's some guy, right? Like maybe some suburban whoever, right? Who buys these drugs and uses them in the end, and that person is the reason why there's a market for it, right? And the movie didn't show this. And the question is, should it have,
Do you
or
think?
would that have been a distraction from the point of the movie?
For me, I don't know how that would have fit or how it would have helped to understand the violence of it. Because I think the main point of the movie, and I think it was going to be like kind of like the next point that I touch on, was the violence of everything. Especially at the start of the movie when they do the initial raid and they see all the bodies that are plastered within the walls. You kind of understand you see scenes like the border where there's that whole like shootout and stuff like that. And I think the movie centers itself more on the violence and trying to control the violence and the effect of the violence on, the people around it, as opposed to more so the drug operation side of things. Because I think if there was less of the violence and there was the drug flow, then I don't think that they would go so hard, and I don't think that they would, push as hard as they did in this movie to try and track down the cartel boss and take him out. But because there was that level of violence, because it was escalating, it was getting worse, they needed to shut it down, and essentially they needed to fight fire with fire, essentially. So I don't think it was like a necessary point, and I don't know whether it would have contributed too much to the movie.
It's necessary insofar as understanding that the violence is happening because the prize is so big, and like this is not that it's not just like this violence isn't just happening just because these are bad people. It's happening because whoever wins this conflict, whoever controls the drug trade, stands to make billions, and they stand to make billions because that's how big the drug market in the United States is. Like that's why, right? And that also means that you cannot. I think there might be a line in there somewhere, and might be forgetting it now, where they say like something along the lines of, if people only would stop buying this stuff or something like that, and then somebody else says, yeah, good luck getting Americans to give up cocaine, right? So I mean, like it really depends. Like I'm kind of of two minds of this. On the one hand, if you want to show how intractable this is, then showing the reason this is so intractable is because there's so much money involved, and so much money is involved because of how much people want these drugs. But then the other side of it is, does that distract from the personal story of Alejandro going for revenge and Kate kind of having this crisis of faith, right? Where she kind of discovers like what this part of the world is like and what things are like outside of her jurisdiction. And basically everything she believes in is basically not applicable, right? Like she learns very quickly that this is not a typical case, right? Where you build a case and you gather evidence and you find witnesses and you arrest suspects and you take them to court. This is not how that works, right? And that is kind of like in the first half of the movie, I think is a central point, and it kind of fades away. Like once that point has been made, I think it kind of fades into the background. And so I think the argument against going into the kind of the causal factors of it is that it distracts from the personal stories. So that is just my question, which of those two would be the better movie, or which of those two, like do they actually conflict?
Yeah, no, I think for me, it would conflict, and it would feel out of place, especially because we spend so much time with the task force, we spend so much time with the law enforcement, and very little time with regular civilians in this, whether it's like family members and the only time we actually do spend with regular civilians is to show the family life of the police officer in Mexico that's working for the drug cartel. So for me, I don't know whether it would have served the story a little bit more. That's all.
But it could be seen as providing more justification for the law enforcement's involvement if they were to do like, kind of like the cause and effect of obviously the drugs and all of that. I'm in two minds, but I'm kind of like steering more towards, I think it would have made the film better. I think it could be, yeah, I think it could have made the storyline better in terms of just, like I said, justification of obviously the reason for obviously the American intervention, because it does seem like without it, we've already been put into a world that we know of, which most of us do know of. Do you know what I'm saying? However, kind of like providing that little backstory would have been like, oh, okay, this makes, so we're kind of seeing like the American intervention rather than it just being fight evil, kind of understanding why they're fighting with evil against this evil, because this evil has caused all of the evil that's spreading in their country.
Yeah, and I think you can do that without making the movie about that, right? Where you can have maybe more than one line, where we just have like scattered that in a few different scenes to kind of make the point repeatedly about why this is happening and why it's not going to go away, right?
And that could have been done with Kate's character, because she ended up becoming like a passive protagonist where she became more of an observer rather than an active participant. So it's like you could have incorporated that with her character, because she represents pretty much, she plays by the book. Do you know what I'm saying? So if she plays by the book, you could have kind of like just used her character to reinforce kind of like, American intervention and why they're actually doing it and how it's affecting, well, even though she's not American, but why it's affecting, America.
Well, she is American.
Oh, I forgot.
She,
Sorry, she's American. Cause sorry, I forgot because she's actually British in real life. So
you
kind
know,
of
the actor
yeah,
is, but the
apologies.
character is an
Yeah, yeah,
FBI agent. Yeah. So
yeah. My
like
bad. Sorry.
she's specifically there to give, give the operation legitimacy to operate in America, which they
E-
couldn't. Um,
Exactly. So I feel like if you use her character, sorry, kind of like as a vehicle for that, it wouldn't have taken away from Alejandro's kind of like story arc.
and one of the interesting things this movie does is that it separates the point of view character and the protagonist. Right? Normally those are the same, right? And here Kate is very much the point of view character. We see things through her eyes, right? She is introduced to this conflict as we are introduced to it, and we see things through her eyes most of the time. But the actual main person in this is Alejandro, right? Because it's his story, it's his mission, and the movie ends with him accomplishing his mission, right? Or with his story having concluded, right? And one of the things that this movie gets criticized for is that Kate is kind of a lame character who doesn't do very much. But I think once you make that separation, that this is an observer, like you said, of somebody else's story, and that is the way in which kind of that's our entry point into this environment. I think at that point the movie starts making a lot of sense, right? So when they go into these tunnels, we actually stay on Kate. There are reasons for why she's staying back, and the other team members kind of go forward and they have the gunfight, and we don't see the gunfight up close. We see her listening to the gunfight, like from 50 meters away, right? And there is even a scene where like some cartel member kind of comes out of the shadows and almost kills her, and then who is it? Is it Reggie? Like shoots him, right? So she has minimum amounts of agency, particularly in that sequence. And I think if you expect her to be the main character, that's kind of lame and kind of puzzling as to why that is. But I think it makes more sense if you think of her as the perspective and Alejandro as the actual main character.
There's actually I saw a very very great breakdown actually of the scene at the border where I think it's like one of the few times where we actually flip to Alejandro's perspective in the movie, and we might link it or whatever like that in some of the bio, but essentially it's like when there's all that traffic building up and they need to get back across the border to the US, and of course like they said like if they try anything it's going to be at the border, so you're kind of expecting the danger. And I saw essentially when they first start saying to like check like the cars or like check something of what's kind of like check your surroundings, we first see it through Kate's perspective where it's not really focused on anything. It's like kind of like a wide shot and you're just kind of like looking amongst like what like amongst the scenery as to what's going on. And then there's a moment where it flips to Alejandro's perspective. And because he's trained and because he's lived in this war and because he's a little bit more experienced than her, then the camera then starts to zoom in on the actual windows and the actual people's in the car because he knows what he's looking for. He knows the danger. He knows that he needs to pay attention to, you know, the people in the car to spot out the different gang members. And there's also like the two people that are like driving in the front passenger. And it was like something about check the red car, something like that. And then they both look at the same time in the same direction to the same car. And then like the last moment was when they're all getting out the car and like the camera work is all, it's a little bit sort of chaotic because it's like Kate from again goes back to Kate's perspective where she doesn't know, she's not experiencing this, she doesn't know what's happening, so the camera's like all shaky and it's a little bit confused and there's like a lot of like fast cuts and stuff like that. And I'm probably explaining it bad and I probably should link the actual like video that I saw because they explained it really well, but essentially it just kind of again shows the different perspectives and sort of kind of shows Kate as just an observer, as like someone that's just like kind of stepping into this world, stepping into the unknown, and not really being experiencing this. But then it again shows sort of other characters that are a little bit more lived, a little bit more sort of experiencing this, and how their sort of how their experiences are completely different. And that was actually going to tie into sort of a question that I was going to have about the morality in this movie and sort of how the movie handles it. For me, I think, I think it's great that we see it from Kate's perspective because it then makes us question on both sides the sort of the violence and the lengths that people are going to. So of course, when we're seeing the cartels, we're seeing the dead bodies, we're a bit like repulsed by it. You're seeing sort of, I think there's a scene where she's like kind of clicking through all the people that the cartel have killed, when she's having a bit of like a crisis of faith, and I think she just kind of, you know, had to like look someone up and then look at sort of all the people that were like maybe associated with dying by his like orders or whatever like that, and she's kind of clicking through and seeing all the people that the cartel have murdered. But then at the same time, you have her again questioning the methods, questioning questioning, you know, the tactics that they're using, and whether it justifies the ends, or like, you know, whether the means justify the ends essentially. So, how did you guys find the debate or sort of the presentation of morality in this particular movie?
So, like very early on in the movie, there's this sequence where they are ambushed in a traffic jam or something like that. At first, Kate doesn't realize that there's an ambush, right? And as far as she is concerned, the other people are just randomly opening fire on, you know, Mexican civilians. But then as she figures it out, the way it's shot becomes more specific, and then you see kind of the people carrying the guns, you know, having the guns at the ready in their cars, you know, setting up the ambush and being about and drawing their weapons and stuff like that. And then she ends up killing one of them themselves as he like pulls the gun on her, right? Like so, and then there's another one where I think it's after the mission where she kind of has this freak out and kind of argues with, I forget if it's with her partner or with her boss, where she says something about, we don't work like this. Like this is not police work. This is, you know, this is not even war. This is just violence, right? And she questions why any of this is happening and why it's necessary, and whether these people have lost their minds, or, you know, whether there's actually a reason for it. And I'm a little bit on the fence about I'm like, one thing I was quick to latch onto is this whole idea of like, this is like the role of law and of justice, as opposed to violence to achieve a goal, right? Like there's a conflict between those two different ideas within this, right? Like, and it's very upfront and it's very obvious. And it's basically what essentially Kate is preoccupied with, at least in the first half of the movie, right? Where she comes from the point of view of, you know, there's laws and procedures and there's a way to do it, and the objective is to catch the bad guy and put them in front of a judge. Whereas everybody else who has been doing this for a while is saying very clearly, no, the goal is to kill the other guy, because that's how you win. And I'm a little bit on the fence about whether this movie insists a little bit too much. Like I think there's a line where you kind of push that idea a little bit too far and kind of just give up on, you know, law and procedure without it actually being necessary. And I think I'd have to watch it again to decide whether this movie actually does cross the line, because like this definitely is a tough situation, and you cannot like apply the same methods and standards as if you were just like an FBI agent in the US, for instance, right? Like it's just different. But this movie might go maybe a step too far in terms of kind of justifying or showing the need for the violence. And I'm not sure about that. I might land on either side of that if I watch it again and think about it a little bit more. But that was kind of my impression the first time watching it.
A part of me feels like they do take liberties when it comes to like, you know, real world law enforcements, when it comes to kind of like the procedures. However, another part of me kind of feels like it's not really like it might not be an over an exaggeration, because it's like just like the war on drugs is like we've established, the war on drugs is a never ending battle. So it's like, how do you, like, when you're in that battle, how do you counter that battle? Because clearly, you know what I'm saying, following the book doesn't work. So it does feel like I wouldn't be surprised if down the line in the future we found out, you know, they were using some of these tactics, or they were using this type of evil to combat that evil. Because like I said, this film definitely does it, like when it comes to just like the moral ambiguity of things, it definitely does convey that very well. So yeah, I'm kind of like in two minds. Like I said, a part of me when I was watching, I felt like it does kind of like feel like an over exaggeration when it comes to less, like when it comes to covering just like, you know, the morality of things. However, at the same time, I'm like, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did do some of these things, because it's like you said, like we said, the war on drugs is mad.
But I think for me, anyways, I think the movie is balanced enough because again, we see from Kate's perspective trying to uphold law and order and trying to sort of uphold the right way of doing things. And then you have Josh Brolin's character who understands the need to to play a little bit dirty in this war to push the boundaries a little bit just to achieve their goal and try to get some type of control over the situation because clearly the Mexican government aren't able to do anything. It's impacting the US, it's impacting their people. He knows that regular methods aren't really going to make a difference, and it's reinforced by Kate's boss. And then I think Alejandro is almost a case of being too far gone because one of his quotes is that this is a land of the wolves, and basically at the end of the movie telling Kate that she doesn't belong because she isn't wolf like him. But I think throughout the movie, you can kind of be like, oh, he's just trying to get information. I think, again, I'm going to call him the Punisher because I can't remember his name in this movie, but with the Punisher's character, with Ted, because he tried to kill Kate, you can be like, oh, okay, like maybe it's a little bit justified. Like, yeah, he kind of deserves it a little bit. But then the real question mark is, again, at the end of the movie, when he's confronting the cartel boss, and then he just mercilessly kills his entire family, kills his two sons, kills his wife right in front of the cartel boss. And I think that's the movie showing someone being too far gone and crossing the line a little bit. So I don't think it pushes too much. Like I can understand that for the majority of the movie, it's essentially saying that these tactics are necessary, and trying to bend the rules a little bit to tackle it is necessary, but there is a line, and there is essentially someone that can be too far gone. I think Alejandro's representation of that.
Yeah, he's definitely, like, Alejandro specifically is very much on a personal vendetta, right? He's using all of these agencies to get what he wants, which is personal revenge. Like, he's definitely not about justice, right? But there's other people too, people in there like Graver.
But is it important to note that he used to be, because he was a prosecutor? And I think that's why in one of the lines that he says to Kate is that you remind me of someone I know, and it could be referring to himself, like back in his day when he was trying to go about things the right way through the law and trying to go through those means. And essentially, where did that lead him? That led to his wife and his kids being murdered, which then meant that he had to change his approach and change who he was to be a little bit more violent. I think that, yeah, I don't know whether that kind of almost like it's almost like, without explicitly doing it in the movie, showing two characters that started in the same point, trying to tackle this through the right way, through the legal means, trying to uphold the law. And when confronted with challenges and confronted with difficult situations, of course, Alejandro's one's a little bit more gruesome in the way that his family died. But when proposed with the reality of the situation and how violent it is, one isn't able to fully go all the way, and one isn't like Kate's character isn't able to fully adopt the mentality or the personality needed to really fight the war. And then Alejandro's like a person that is almost consumed by it to a point where he's trained himself up to be this hitman, and has gone through all the lengths and through all the the procedures just to get his revenge. I don't know if you see like the parallel in their stories.
Yeah, I think there's definitely parallels in that sense. It's more about, for Alejandro, it's personal, right? And for Kate, it isn't. I think that is one of the key differences between them. To Alejandro, like, only the result matters, right? But in order to achieve justice, you actually have to care about the process, right? Because that determines what tools you're allowed to use and what standards and what goals you follow and so on. And there's like more than two possible ways to do this, right? Like, I'm absolutely open to the idea this is a military problem, that the cartels just have to be destroyed, and you can't do that with just law enforcement, right? Like that is a job for like military tactics maybe. So just the existence of violence is by itself not so much the problem. It's more about, a lot of the movie shows why the violence is so prevalent and why the intensity is so high, and I'm not sure that all of them are wrong, right? Like at some point, like, the movie keeps justifying for why Kate's preferred methods are not sufficient and are not adequate, right, to solving this problem. So if she called the shots, then everybody would die probably because they were not using adequate tactics and methods. So it's I think it is a kind of an open question, but you can distinguish, I think, between Alejandro's pursuit of personal revenge versus somebody saying this requires methods that are more extreme than what like the FBI would use, right? Like in a legal, lawful like framework. You know what I mean? So I think there's a difference between those things, and the movie spends a lot of time showing the necessity and also the coolness of these extreme tactics because it's shot in a way to make these things look very cool. And I think you kind of walk away from it thinking, yeah, maybe these guys are a bit off the deep end, but ultimately they're right, in terms of choosing those kinds of tactics. Again, after one watch, it's all a little bit of a blur, but that's kind of where I kind of walked away from it saying, is this kind of trying a little bit too hard to justify why this stuff is necessary? And I've not made up my mind about that.
Because I think the key person in this is Josh Brolin's character, because he's the one that's in between. He's the one that can't do what Alejandro's doing because he doesn't get involved in torturing any of the people, but he allows it to happen because he knows it's necessary to get the right information, to get the details that they need to achieve their goals. And he's almost like, again, Alejandro's like the difference between when it's just business to when it becomes personal, essentially, because again, there's like a certain, like, again, for like Josh Brolin's character, there's like a certain length that he's willing to go to, and like there's a certain like parameter that they're willing to operate by, even if they're like pushing the boundaries of it a little bit, even though if they're like extending the line a little bit further than what it should be. But they themselves never actually cross that line. They allow Alejandro to do it as an outside agent and as an outside force because for him it's personal. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think the movie does a good job of just like allowing you to think and debate about what the right method is.
Yeah, it's just a little bit harder to do if you don't know like the causes, and like that's kind of why I brought up the question of should it have shown the causes more and kind of the context for it, because we see very little about it. We kind of see the consequences of the situation, but we don't really see the causes, and it's kind of hard to talk about or evaluate how necessary this is if you don't have the full picture, right? So that's kind of why I brought that up earlier.
I was gonna say, because I know we're kind of like running out of time. I know you love a good ending. How did this ending? Unless you had like another point, but I was going to like touch on how did you think the movie handled the ending, and did it conclude the story well enough for you?
So I kind of like the idea that it kind of ends on a bittersweet ending in the sense that the bad guy is caught, right? Or like the main goal is achieved, but it's come at the price. Like it's like Kate has essentially signed off on the idea that this was like a lawful operation, right? And that is kind of what Alejandro gets from Kate in the last scene, right? And she then kind of pulls her gun on him, essentially saying this is the only way she can get even with him, but then she doesn't do it. And like then he kind of walks away having won, essentially, right? He's essentially achieved what he wanted, and Kate has compromised her principles in order to facilitate that, and that's kind of where it ends. And then it ends on the soccer game scene that kind of shows the big picture. In the big picture, it has done nothing, right? Like it has not, in fact, changed the circumstances of the people caught up in this, who have to live in this, like in this situation after all the main characters leave. So I think that's pretty much the only way you can end this. I'm not sure like a happy ending could work here, because like the mission is essentially achieved, but under the most ambiguous and compromised circumstances, right? Or in the most kind of muddled sense of the word, right? But also it has not solved the problem, right? The cartels still exist, the violence still exists, the drugs still exist, and as everybody goes home, those things continue to exist. You know what I mean? Like I think that is the only way you can end that kind of story.
Yeah, I agree. Pretty much everything Daniel said as well, I agree with, and was gonna kind of like mention most of it. I feel like a bleak outlook in this one was definitely the right way to resolve the film because there's no resolution when it comes to the subject matter.
I agree. I agree. And I like, for me personally, I loved the whole interaction between Alejandro and Kate at the end, and just like how intense it was, and just again, that's just like another again shows how far gone he was, because he literally was ready to kill her and make it look like a suicide if she didn't sign off
Yeah.
on the mission, essentially. And it was just like, again, just like so dark and just like gritty. And it's, again, it's not like he dislikes her or has any personal vendetta against her or anything like that. It's just back to being business for him. And it's just like, this needs to be approved, otherwise whatever. So yeah, that whole interaction, that whole whatever was just great cinema.
I will say one of the things that I really enjoyed about this is just watching adults work. Like, there's not many movies that do this at the moment, right? Like, I mean, this is kind of 10 years old, and movies were different 10 years ago. But just in terms of movies that come out now, there's not many movies that just show professionals doing their thing and being good at it. You know what I mean? Like, it's a rare thing. And even though this is presented in a very morally ambiguous and messy context, just the way it's shot was kind of engaging to watch. And I think that's a big part of why this movie works, is because like the moment, like there's so many scenes in this where, and it's not just the combat scenes, right? But it's also like the way people interact with each other, prepare for the missions, and the way they talk and the way they engage with their professions. Like, I buy that these are professional adults, and I don't do that with most movies that come out.
Especially, one thing I did notice was, I'm going to keep saying Josh Brolin's character because I can't remember his name, but just the aura and the air that he gave off, and kind of like him being the big dog, and just like the comfortability about it. So like in the first meeting when they're essentially bringing on Kate to the mission, and he's in a meeting with Kate's boss, you can see everyone's in there like suited, booted, whatever, and he's just in there with flip flops with his feet out, because he's just like that guy. He kind of does whatever he wants. And even when they get picked up and they're in the car ride, he kind of just jumps in the car and puts his feet up on the seat, because he just kind of like owns shit, and he's just like whatever. I don't know. It was just like small details like that about his character where he just expressed like how much like he owned it, and like how just like his aura and stuff like that was just like great to see.
Yay! Whoa! For me, it was good watching this again. Kind of forgot about this one. For some reason, I don't know why. It's kind of like I wouldn't say like a forgettable film for me, but in the same way it kind of is. Because obviously when I was watching it again, it was a lot that I forgot, so it felt refreshing watching it again. And kind of like speaking about it as well, it's kind of like refreshing as well, because at first that I watched it a few times. First when I watched it a couple of times, I just kind of like saw it as face value as just a film of vengeance. But then obviously like there's of course it is technically that, but there is kind of like more to it as well, which obviously we spoke about today. So it was good kind of like speaking it with you guys, providing more of an insight, especially when it comes to your views on obviously just, how you felt about the film as well, and what kind of like it told you. So yeah, overall definitely would recommend people to go watch this film if you haven't seen it. Good film.
Yeah, for me, I'm glad I saw it. I think actually I have a memory of when Sicario came out. I was talking to some friends, and we are thinking about, I think we saw a different movie, and a trailer for Sicario came out. And afterwards, we talked about whether we wanted to go see it. And I think we all passed on it because it kind of looked like a generic action movie, which is the fault of the trailer at the time, right? At least like it didn't make any kind of impression on us, and we didn't know who Denis Villeneuve was at the time. So that wasn't like a mark of quality, right? Today, if I hear the name, I at least expect a well-made movie, if nothing else. I think there's a lot more to this movie than just like a really good action movie, right? Like it's got these different characters kind of interacting with this milieu of law and justice and violence and all that entails, right? Like it's just, I think, really well done. It's just filmmaking just at a high level, right? And it just operates on, I think, on a different level than most movies, just in terms of raw quality, before you even get to plot and character and all of that.
Yeah, I actually didn't know it was Denis Villeneuve that made this movie. I was never like really plugged into who directors were back then, etc. Of course, you know Christopher Nolan from like Inception and stuff like that, but wasn't a name that I was aware of, or one that I needed to pay attention to. So then, like watching this, revisiting it, understanding the movie as well, it's clear to see why he has the reputation that he has today, because he's been putting in quality work for a very long time. And I think, us as the audience are just kind of catching up to sort of the work that he's done, or sort of really paying attention to it. But overall, this is a very, very high quality movie for me. I think, I love everything about it. I love the tone, I love the setting, I love the characters, I love some of the story. Just kind of everything about this just hits in all the right ways for me. Definitely high up on my like all time favorite movie list. I think Sicario is really, really, really high up there for me. So yeah, definitely one I'm a big fan of. And then last question, did this make you want to check out the sequel?
Depends who directed it.
Not Denis Villeneuve.
I think I heard something somewhere that it doesn't live up to the original. Like it carries it has the name, but other than that, it doesn't have very much to do with it. Is that accurate?
I've only watched that one once, actually. I've only watched it, and I remember really liking it. I remember really, really liking it, but I couldn't tell you anything about that movie. So who knows?
Yeah, but I mean the plot I don't think necessarily needs a sequel. So if it's basically another story in that style, that sounds interesting. The thing that mostly catches my attention is just how well it's made, right? Like the pictures just look good. Like it's just a beautifully shot movie, even when it depicts terrible things. And kind of that was a big part of my enjoyment that I had watching it. So I'm like by itself, I'm not sure a sequel. I would expect a sequel to be able to keep that up, but I'm ready to be proven wrong on that.
Well, guys, thank you very much for joining into today's discussion. We hope that you enjoyed.
If you reach this part of the episode, of course, as always, thank you very much for working with us. As always, if you like what we discussed today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we're chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
All right, guys, you had it here first. We will catch you next time. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye bye.